finally, new rule: if someone knows of a story that more effectively captures what's wrong with today's journalism than the sad saga of what happened last week at the Washington Post, they need to keep it to themselves, because it would be too depressing. If you missed it, the Washington Post recently got embroiled in a self-inflicted shitstorm when one of their best reporters, David Weigel, retweeted this joke. Every girl is bi. You just have to figure out if it's polar or sexual. Proving it is a joke. Thank you. The comedian who actually wrote the tweet called it a banal throwaway joke, which is exactly what it is. Throwaway, as in if you don't like it, throw it away. For eons, both sexes have made jokes about how the other is crazy, and no one but the perpetually offended thinks it means anything more than that the sexes get frustrated over how differently we each see the world. And yes, we relieve some of that frustration with humor and scene. Nevertheless, Weigel pulled down his retweet and wrote, "I apologize and did not mean to cause any harm," and that was the end of that. I'm joking, of course. The unlicensed daycare center that is today's newsroom went apeshit. You see, the Post has another writer named Felicia Sonmez, and she's a lot. For example, she tweeted about Kobe Bryant's 2003 rape trial hours after his helicopter crash. And despite the fact that she says Dave Weigel is a good friend, she resurrected the tweet he had taken down with a screenshot and demanded to know what the Post was going to do about this unacceptable evil that must not be allowed to stand. Sarcastically writing, "Fantastic to work at a news outlet where tweets like this are allowed. Yes, can you imagine a world that allows jokes you don't like?"
Good morning. It's Saturday, the Jury Saturday, August the 5th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, and I, the Jury, 45 minutes worth, Chapter 12. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Down he dies, coming a flame.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
There is only one difference between a bad economist and a good one. The bad economist confines himself to the visible effect. The good economist takes into account both the effect that can be seen and those effects that must be foreseen. Friedrich Bastiat. When I first began studying economics as a very young man, this quote had a transformative effect on me. It is a rather famous quote, so I'm not alone in that. But like the broken window fallacy that Bastiat postulated as the preface to this quote, we see that good economics is fundamentally being willing to look beyond the superficial. Bad policies can seem good, and good policies can seem bad. It is transcending the readily apparent, the short-term, and the easily visible that separates cogent economic policy from the pedestrian and even dangerous.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative suggested federal political priorities? Number 1, recognize that the government has no rights. 2, defund Planned Parenthood. 3, replace the Affordable Care Act. 4, institute zero-based budgeting. 5, prohibit collective bargaining for all public employees. 6, assign criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. 7, immediately repeal the Patriot Act. 8, immediately repeal all emergency dictator laws. 9, reinstate writs of outlawry. 10, use taxpayer funds to sponsor recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 11, create a flexible minimum wage. 12, means test health care. 13, immediately and permanently prohibit investment banking by any office holder. And 14, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The robotization of man. First, let me utter a word of caution. We must not make the mistake of thinking that there is any one particular nation that can be completely identified with this hypothetical land. The characteristics to be discussed can come into existence here. Some of totalitarian characteristics were, of course, present in Nazi Germany, and they can today be found behind the Iron Curtain. But they exist to some extent in other parts of the world as well. Totalitaria is any country in which the political ideas degenerate into senseless formulations made only for propaganda purposes. It is any country in which a single group, left or right, acquires absolute power and becomes omniscient and omnipotent. Any country in which disagreement and differences of opinion are crimes, in which utter conformity is the price of life. Totalitaria, the Leviathan state, is the home of the political system we call, euphemistically, totalitarianism, of which systematic tyranny is a part. This system does not derive from any honest political philosophy, either socialist or capitalist. Totalitarian leaders may mouth ideologies, but these are in fact mainly catchwords used to justify the regime. If necessary, totalitarianism can change its slogans and behavior overnight. For totalitarianism embodies, to me, the quest for total power, the quest of a dictator to rule the world. The words and concepts of socialism and communism may serve, like democracy, as a disguise for the megalomaniac intention of the tyrant. Since totalitarianism is essentially the social manifestation of a psychological phenomenon belonging to every personality, it can be best understood in terms of the human forces that create, foster, and perpetuate it. Man has two faces. He wants to grow toward maturity and freedom, and yet the primitive child in his unconscious yearns for complete protection and irresponsibility. His mature self learns to cope with the restrictions and frustrations of daily life, but at the same time, the child in him longs to hit out against them, to beat them down, to destroy them, whether they be objects or people. Totalitarianism appeals to this confused infant in all of us. It seems to offer a solution to the problems man's double yearning creates. Our mythical totalitaria is a monolithic and absolute state in which doubt, Confusion and conflict are not permitted to be shown, but the dictator purports to solve all his subjects' problems for them. In addition, totalitarian can provide official sanction for the expression of man's most antisocial impulses. The uncivilized child hidden in us may welcome this liberation from ethical frustrations. On the other hand, our free, mature social selves cannot be happy in totalitarian. They revolt against the restriction of individual impulses. The psychological roots of totalitarianism are usually irrational, destructive, and primitive, though disguised behind some ideology. And for this reason, there's something fantastic, unbelievable, even nightmarish about the system itself. There is, of course, a difference in the psychic experience of the elite, who can live out their needs for power, and the masses, who have to submit. Yet, the two groups influence each other. When a dictator's deep neurotic needs for power also satisfy some profound emotional need in the population of his country, especially in times of misery or after a revolution, he is more easily able to assume the power for which he longs. If a nation has suffered defeat in war, for example, its citizens feel shame and resentment. Loss of face is not simply a political abstraction. It is a very real and personal thing to a conquered people. Every man, consciously or unconsciously, identifies with his native land. If a country suffers from prolonged famine or severe depression, its citizens become bitter, depressed, and resentful, and will more willingly accept the visions and promises of an expiring dictator. If the complexity of a country's political and economic apparatus makes the individual citizens feel powerless, confused, and useless, if he has no sense of participation in the forces that govern his daily life, or if he feels these forces to be so vast and confusing that he can no longer understand them, he will grasp at the totalitarian opportunity for belonging, for participation, for a simple formula that explains and rationalizes what is beyond his comprehension. And when the dictator has taken over finally, he transfers his own abnormal fantasies, his rage and anger, easily to his subjects. Their resentments feed his pseudo-strength encourages them. A mutual fortifications of illusions takes place. Totalitarianism as a social manifestation is a disease of interhuman relations. And like any other disease, man can best resist its corroding effects if, through knowledge and training, he is well immunized against it. If, however, he is unfortunate enough to catch the totalitarian bug, he has to muster all the positive forces in his mind to defeat it. The raging internal struggle between the irresponsible child and the mature adult in him continues until one or the other is finally destroyed completely. As long as a single spark of either remains, the battle goes on. And for as long as man is alive, the quest for maturity keeps on. Cultural predilection.
And that was The Robotization of Man from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, MD. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, I, the Jury.
Chapter 12. My tailor had a fit when he saw the bullet hole in my coat. I guess he was afraid he was coming close to losing a good customer. He pleaded with me to be careful, then told me he'd have the cloth rewoven by next week. I picked up my other suit and went home. The phone was ringing when I opened the door. I dropped the suit over the back of a chair and grabbed the receiver. It was Pat. I just got a report on the bullet that killed Bobo Hopper, Mike. Go on. I was all excited now. Same one. That does it, Pat. Anything else? Yeah. I have Kolecki's gun here, too. The bullet doesn't fit except with the ones he let loose at you. We traced the serial number, and it was sold down south. It went through 2 more hands and wound up in a pawn shop on 3rd Avenue, where it went to a guy named George K. Masters. So that was how George got the gun. No wonder there was no record of it before. Kolecki was his middle and probably a family name. I thanked Pat and hung up. Now, why the hell would Kolecki be using that name? Not unless he was liable to be traced through his real one for a crime committed some time ago. At any rate, the question would have to remain unanswered, unless Pat could make some sense out of the evidence we found in the safe deposit box. You can't prosecute a corpse. After I ate, I showered and was getting dressed when the phone went off again. This time, it was Myrna. She wanted me to pick her up earlier, if I could, tomorrow morning. Now, that was all right with me, and I told her so. She still sounded pretty bad, and I was glad to do what I could to help her out. Maybe the ride into the country would do her good. Poor kid, she needed something to cheer her up. The only thing that had me worried was that she might try going back on the junk again to get Jack's death out of her mind. She was a smart girl, and there were other ways. Someday she would settle down with a nice fella, and Jack would be but a memory. That's the way nature made us. Maybe it's best. Charlotte met me in front of the apartment house. When she saw me coming, she tapped her foot impatiently, as though she'd been waiting an hour. "Mike," she said fiercely, "you're late. A whole 5 minutes. Explain." "And don't beat me with that whip." I laughed. "I got held up in traffic." "A likely excuse. I bet you were trying to see what makes a nymphomaniac tick again." She was a little devil. "Shut up and climb in. We'll never get a seat in the show otherwise." "Where are we going?" "I'm in the mood for a good whodunit, if you are. Maybe I can pick up something new in detecting techniques." "Swell. Let's go, McDuff." We finally found a small theater along the stem that didn't have a line outside a mile long, and we sat through 2.5 hours of a fantastic murder mystery that had more holes in it than a piece of Swiss cheese, and a Western that moved as slowly as the Long Island Railroad during a snowstorm. When we got out, I thought I had blisters on my butt. Charlotte suggested having a sandwich, so we stopped in a dog wagon for poached eggs on toast, then moved on down to a bar for a drink. I ordered beer, and when Charlotte did the same, I raised my eyebrows. "Go ahead, get what you want. I got dough." She giggled. "Silly, I like beer. Always have." "Well, glad to hear it. I can't make you out. An expensive hobby, but you drink beer. Maybe you aren't going to be so hard to keep after all." "Oh, if it comes to a pinch, I can always go back to work." Nothing doing. No wife of mine is going to work. I want her at home, where I know where she is." Charlotte laid her beer down and looked at me wickedly. "Has it ever occurred to you that you've never even proposed to me? How do you know I'll have you?" "Okay, Minx," I said. I took her hand in mine and raised it to my lips. "Will you marry me?" She started to laugh, but tears came into her eyes, and she pushed her face against my shoulder. "Oh, Mike, yes. Yes, I love you so much." "I love you too, kitten. Now drink your drink. Tomorrow night at the twins' place, we'll duck the crowd and make some plans." "Kiss me." A couple of wise guys were watching me leeringly. I didn't care. I kissed her easy-like. "When do I get my ring?" she wanted to know. "Soon. I have a few checks coming in this week or next, and we can go down to Tiffany's and pick one up. How's that?" "Wonderful, Mike. Wonderful. I'm so happy." We finished the beer, had another, then started out. The pair of wise guys threw me a hey, hey as I passed. I dropped Charlotte's arm for a second, then put my hands on each side of their heads and brought them together with a clunk like a couple of gourds. Both the guys were sitting upright on their stools. In the mirror, I could see their eyes. They looked like 4 agate marbles. The bartender was watching me, his mouth open. I waved to him and took Charlotte out. Behind me, the 2 guys fell off their stools and hit the deck like wet rags. "My protector," she squeezed my arm. "Ah, shut up," I grinned. I felt pretty good right then. Kathy was sleeping, so we tiptoed in. Charlotte put a hand over the chime to stop its reverberations, but even then we heard the maid stop snoring. She must have gone over on her back again because the snoring resumed. She took off her coat, then asked, "Want a drink?" "Nope." "What then?" "You." The next second, she was in my arms, kissing me. Her breasts were pulsating with passion. I held her as closely as I could. "Tell me, Mike." "I love you." She kissed me again. I pushed her away and picked up my hat. "Enough, darling," I said. "After all, I'm only a man. One more kiss like that, and I won't be able to wait until after we're married." She grinned and threw herself at me for that kiss, but I held her off. "Please, Mike." "No." "Then let's get married right away, tomorrow." I had to smile. She was so damn adorable. Not tomorrow, but very soon, honey. I can't hold out much longer. She held the chime while I opened the door. I kissed her lightly and slipped out. I could see where I wouldn't get much sleep that night. When Velda heard about this, she'd throw the roof at me. I hated to tell her. My alarm went off at 6. I slapped the button down to stop the racket, then sat up and stretched. When I looked out the window, the sun was shining. A beautiful day. A half-empty bottle of beer was on the night table, and I took a swallow. It was as flat as a tabletop mesa. After a shower, I threw a robe around me and dug in the pantry for something to eat. The only box of cereal had teeth marks in it where a mouse had beaten me to it, so I opened a sack of potatoes and onions and stripped them into a pan of grease and let the whole mess cook while I made coffee. I burned the potatoes, but they tasted good just the same. Even my coffee was agreeable. This time next month, I'd be eating across the table from a gorgeous blonde. What a wife she was going to make. Myrna was up when I called her. She said she'd be ready at 8 and reminded me not to be late. I promised her I wouldn't, then buzzed Charlotte. Hello, Lazy. I yawned. But you don't sound so bright yourself this time of the morning. Well, I am. What are you doing? I'm trying to get some sleep. After the state you left me in last night, I didn't close my eyes for 3 hours. I lay in bed wide awake. That made me feel good. I know what you mean. What time will you be at the Bellamy place? Still early in the evening, unless I can break away sooner. At least I'll be there for the game. Who is it that's playing? I forget. A couple of fancy hotshots that Mary and Esther imported. I'll be waiting for you to show up, so make it snappy. Okay, darling. She kissed me over the phone, and I gave her one back before I hung up. Velda wouldn't be in the office yet, so I called her at home. When she answered, I could hear a background of bacon sizzling on the fire. Hello, Velda. Mike. Hey, what are you doing up so early? I have an important date. Anything to do with the case? Well, it may have, but I'm not sure. I can't afford to miss it. If Pat calls, tell him I can be reached at the home of the Mrs. Bellamy. He has their number. Velda didn't answer at first. I knew she was trying to figure out what I was up to. All right, she said finally. Just watch what you're doing. Anything I can take care of while you're gone? No, guess not. By the way, how long are you going to be gone this time? Maybe until Monday. And maybe not. Very well. See you, Mike. So long. I threw a quick so long and put the phone on its chucks. Oh, how I hated to tell Velda about Charlotte. If only she wouldn't cry. Now what the hell? That's life. Velda just missed. If Charlotte hadn't come along, I would have tied up with her. I used to feel like I wanted to, but never had time. Oh well. Myrna was dressed and ready when I arrived. She had packed a bag and I took it down to the car. She didn't look too good. There were still dark spots under her eyes and her cheekbones were a little too prominent. She had bought a new dress for the occasion, a nice flowered print, and under the light blue of the wool coat, it made her face look lovely. That is, unless she looked too closely. I didn't want to mention Jack at all, so we talked about the day and anything trivial that came up. I knew she'd seen the front page headlines about me knocking off Kolecki, but she avoided the subject. It was a nice day. Out of the city, the roads were fairly empty, and we rolled along at a conservative 50. That way, I didn't have to bother about the highway patrol. We passed a few open lots where the kids were getting in an early ball game. I saw tears come into Myrna's eyes when we passed some small cottages. I winced. She was taking it hard. Gradually, I led the conversation around to the tennis match that night and got her mind off what she was thinking. It wasn't long afterward that we pulled into the private drive of the Bellamy estate. I thought we were early, but there were 24 others there before us. A row of cars ran along the side of the mansion, and one of the twins came out to meet us. I didn't know which one it was until she said, "Hello, Sissy." "Hello, Mary," I said through a smile. She had on a halter and a pair of shorts that left nothing to the imagination. Both pieces were so tight, every line of her body showed through, and she knew it. I couldn't get my eyes off her legs, and walking up to the house, she kept brushing against me. That had to cease. I shifted Myrna's grip over to keep a barrier between us, and Mary broke out into a giggle. At the house, she turned Myrna over to a maid, then turned to me. "Didn't you bring some sport clothes along?" "Yep, but all the sports I intend to indulge in will be done at the bar." "Nuts. Go get in a pair of slacks. There's a golf game to be held behind the house, and a lot of the kids are looking for partners for a tennis game." "For Pete's sake, I'm no athlete." Mary stood off a few feet and looked me over from top to bottom. "You look like an athlete if I ever saw one." "What kind?" I joked. "A bed athlete." Her eyes said that she wasn't joking. She walked back to the car with me to get my clothes. When we got in the house, she showed me to a room, an oversized thing with a huge 4-poster smack in the middle of it. Mary couldn't wait until I closed the door. She flung herself at me and opened her mouth. Hell, couldn't disappoint the hostess, so I kissed her. "Now scram while I get dressed," I told her. Her mouth went into a pout. "Why?" "Look," I tried to be convincing. "I don't get undressed in front of women." "Since when?" she asked impishly. "Well, it was dark then," I told her. "Besides, it's too early for that." I got another one of those sexy smiles. Her eyes were begging me to undress her. "Okay, sissy." She closed the door behind her, and I heard that deep-throated laugh. The gang outside was making a racket, and I poked my head out the window to see what was up. Directly beneath me, 2 underweight males were having a hair-pulling match, while 4 others egged them on. What a place! The 2 boys hit the dirt together, and followed by a slap or 2. I grinned. A couple of pansies trying to decide who would be Queen of the May. I drew a pitcher of water from the sink and let it go on their blonde heads. That ended the fight. They both let out a falsetto scream and got up running. The gang saw me and howled. It was a good gag. Mary met me downstairs. She was lounging against the porch railing, smoking a cigarette. I came out in slacks and a sweatshirt and tossed her a hello. Myrna joined us at the same time, swinging a tennis racket against her legs. I could see that Mary was disappointed at not getting me alone. The 3 of us walked across the lawn to the courts, with Mary hanging onto my arm. Before we quite reached there, another edition of her stepped out of a group of players and waved to us. Esther Bellamy. She was another to make your mouth drool. She recognized me immediately and offered a firm handshake. Her manner was cool and reserved. I saw what Charlotte meant when she said Esther wasn't like her sister. However, there seemed to be no resentment or jealousy. Esther had her admirers too. We were introduced all around to a lot of people whose names I forgot as soon as I met them, and Mary carted me off to a vacant court for a game of singles. Tennis wasn't in my line, she found out. After a hectic 10 minutes, I had batted the balls over the fence, and we gathered them up and put them in a box and laid the rackets down. Mary sat on a bench beside me with her brown legs stuck out in front of her, while I cooled off. "Why are we wasting time out here, Mike? Your room is so much nicer." "Oh, some dame." "You rush things, Mary. Why aren't you more like your sister?" She gave me a short laugh. "Maybe I am." "How do you mean?" "Oh, nothing, I guess. But Esther keeps her eyes open, too. She's no virgin." "How do you know?" Mary giggled and folded her knees under her hands. "She keeps a diary." "I bet yours is a lot thicker," I said. "Uh-huh, lots." I took her hand and pulled her from the bench. "Come on, show me where the bar is." We took a flagstone path back to the house and entered through a pair of French windows. The bar was built off a trophy room that was well packed with cups and medals, decorated with live oak paneling and blown-up photographs of the Bellamy sisters, winning everything from a golf game to a ski jump. Now, they certainly were an active pair. The curious thing about it was that they didn't like publicity. I wondered where the rumor started that they were looking for husbands. Husbands that would satisfy, maybe. I guess Mary gave me up as hopeless for a while. She left me with a bartender who sat at the end of the 30-foot bar reading a stack of comic magazines, getting up only long enough to pour me a fresh drink every time I emptied my glass. Several times I had company, but not for long. Myrna came in once, then left after a few pleasant words. Some other tootsies tried their hand at making a strange face, but were dragged off by their boyfriends who chased them into the bar. One of the pansies I doused did his bit too, and all it took to get him out was a strong hand on the seat of his shorts and another around his neck. The whole deal was getting very monotonous. I wished Charlotte would get here. I thought I'd have a nice time with Mary, but compared to Charlotte, she was a flop. Mary only had sex. Charlotte had that, plus a lot more. I managed to sneak out without the bartender seeing me and found my room. There, I changed back to my street clothes, patted old Junior under my arm, and lay down on the bed. Now I felt normal. The drinks did more to me than I thought. I didn't pass out. I simply fell asleep, but quick. The next thing I knew, someone was shaking me, and I looked up into the prettiest face in the world. Before my eyes were all the way open, Charlotte kissed me, then mussed my hair. "Is this the way you greet me? I thought you'd be at the gate waiting for me with open arms." "Hello, beautiful," I said. I pulled her down on the bed and kissed her. "What time is it?" She looked at her watch. 7:30. "Holy cow, I slept the whole day out practically." "I'll say you have. Now get dressed and come downstairs for dinner. I want to see Myrna." We got up and I saw her to the door, then washed my face and tried to smooth the wrinkles out of my coat. When I thought I was presentable enough, I went downstairs. Mary saw me and waved me over. "You're sitting by me tonight," she told me. The crowd was beginning to file in, and I found the place card with my name on it. Charlotte was sitting directly opposite me, at any rate. I felt much better at that. The two of them ought to be fun, unless Mary started playing kneesy under the table. Charlotte sat down with a smile, and Myrna was next to her. Through the appetizer, they spoke to each other earnestly, laughing occasionally over some private joke. I glanced down the table to see if there was anyone I knew. One face seemed fairly familiar, although I couldn't place it. He was a short, skinny guy, dressed in a dark gray flannel. His only conversation was with the heavy-set woman opposite him. There was so much chatter at the table, I couldn't get a line on what they were talking about, but I saw him sneak a few side glances my way. He happened to turn his full face toward me for a moment. Then I recognized him. He was one of the men I had seen going into Madame June's call house the night of the raid. I nudged Mary, and she quit talking to the guy on her other side long enough to look my way. "Who's the squirt down at the end?" I asked, motioning with my fork. Mary picked him out and said, "Oh, why, that's Harmon Wilder, our attorney. He's the one who invests our money for us. Why?" "Just curious. I thought I recognized him." "You should. He used to be one of the best criminal lawyers in the country before he gave it up for a private practice in something less sensational." I said, "Oh," then returned to my food. Charlotte had found my foot under the table and tapped it with her toe. Behind the table, the lawn was moonlit. A perfect night. I'd be glad when supper was over. Mary tried me out in conversation all too suggestive. I saw Charlotte give her a glance that was full of fire, winked, then cut Mary off pretty sharply. She sort of got the idea that something was up between me and Charlotte and whispered into my ear, "I'll get you tonight, big stuff, after she's gone." She yelped when I stuck my elbow in her ribs. Dinner ended when one of the fruits fell out of his chair at the table's end. Right after that, there was a lot of noise, and the two tennis players who were to be featured in the game that night stood up and toasted success to each other with glasses of milk. I managed to get through to Charlotte and took Myrna and her out to the courts together. A lot of cars were driving up, probably some neighbors invited just for the game. The floodlights had been turned on over the sun-baked clay, and bleacher seats had been erected sometime during the latter part of the afternoon while I was asleep. There was a general scramble for seats, and we missed. Charlotte and Myrna spread their handkerchiefs down on the grass along the border of the playing field, and we waited while the crowd got 6 deep behind us. I had never seen a real tennis game, but from what I had seen, I didn't think there were that many people who liked the game. There were announcements over a portable loudspeaker, and the players took their places. Then they went into action. I had more fun watching the spectators' heads going back and forth like a bunch of monkeys on sticks than I did the game itself. These boys were pretty good. They worked up a terrific sweat, but they kept after that ball, running themselves ragged. Occasionally, there would be a spectacular play, and the crowd would let out a cheer. On a high bench, the referee announced the score. Myrna kept pressing her hand to her head. Then, between sets, she excused herself to Charlotte and me, saying that she wanted to go to the cloakroom and get an aspirin. No sooner had she left when Mary plunked herself down in the same spot beside me and started her routine. I waited for Charlotte to start something, but she merely smiled grimly and let me fight it out myself. Mary tapped her on the shoulder. "Can I borrow your man a few minutes? I want him to meet some people." "Sure, go ahead." Charlotte winked gaily at me and made believe she was pouting, but she knew she had me. From now on, Charlotte had nothing to worry about. Just the same, I felt like throttling Mary. Just sitting there had been nice. We wormed out through the gang who had moved up to take new places and stretched themselves between sets. Mary took me around to the other side, then started walking toward the woods. "Oh, where are the people you wanted me to meet?" I asked. Her hand groped for mine in the darkness. "Don't be silly," she answered. "I just want you to myself for a while." Look, Mary," I explained, "it's no good. The other night was a mistake. Charlotte and I are engaged. I can't be fooling around with you. It isn't fair to either of you." She tucked her arm under mine. "Oh, but you don't have to marry me. I don't want that. It takes all the fun out of it." What was I going to do with a woman like that? "Listen," I told her, "you're a nice kid, and I like you a lot, but you are a serious complication to me." She let my arm go. We were under a tree now, and it was pitch black. I could barely see the outline of her face. The moon, which not so long ago had been out in full brilliance, had disappeared behind a cloud. I kept talking to her, trying to dissuade her from putting a line on me, but she didn't answer. She hummed snatches from a tune. I heard her breathing in the darkness, but that was all. When I had about exhausted myself, she said, "Will you kiss me just once more if I promise to let you alone?" I breathed a little easier. "Yeah, sure, honey. Just one more kiss." Then I stretched out my arms to hold her, to kiss, and I got the shock of my life. The little devil had taken off all her clothes in the darkness. That kiss was like molten lava. I couldn't push her away, nor did I want to now. She clung to me like a shadow, squirming and pulling at me. The sound of the crowd cheering the game 100 yards away dimmed to nothingness, and all I could hear was the roaring in my ears. The game was almost over when we got back. I scrubbed the lipstick away from my mouth and dusted off my clothes. Mary saw her sister and was gracious enough to let me alone for a while. So while I still had the chance, I skirted the crowd and tried to find Charlotte. She was where I had left her, only she had gotten tired of sitting down. She and a tall youngster were splitting a Coke together. That made me mad. Hell, I was a fine one to be pulling a jealousy stunt after what I just did. I called to her, and she came back to me. "Where have you been?" "Fighting," I lied. "Fighting for my honor." "Well, you look it. How did you make out? Or shouldn't I ask?" "I did it all right. It took time, though. You been here all the time?" "Yep, just like a good little wife. I sit home while my husband is out with other women." She laughed. The shout that ended the tennis game came simultaneously with the scream from the house. That scream stifled any cheer that might have been given. It rang out in the night again and again, then dwindled off to a low moan. I dropped Charlotte's hand and ran for the house. The bartender was standing in the doorway, as white as a sheet. He could hardly talk. He pointed up the stairs, and I took them two at a time. The first floor opened on the cloakroom, an affair as big as a small ballroom. The maid was huddled on the floor, out like a light. Beyond her was Myrna, a bullet hole clean through her chest. She still had her hands clutched futilely against her breasts, as though to protect herself. I felt her pulse. She was dead. Downstairs, the crowd was pounding across the lawn. I shouted to the bartender to shut the doors, then grabbed the phone and got the gatekeeper. I told him to close the gates and not let anyone out, hung up, and dashed downstairs. I picked out 3 men in overalls whom I had taken for gardeners and asked them who they were. "Gardener," one said. The other was a handyman on the estate, and the third was his helper. "Got any guns around here?" They nodded. 6 shotguns and a 30-30 in the library, the handyman said. "Then get him," I ordered. "There's been a murder upstairs, and the killer is someplace on the grounds. Patrol the estate and shoot anybody you see trying to get away. Understand? The gardener started to argue, but when I pulled my badge on him, he and the others took off for the library, got the guns, returned a minute later, and shot out the door. The crowd was gathered in front. I stepped outside and held up my hand for silence. When I told them what had happened, there were a few screams, a lot of nervous talk, and everyone in general had the jitters. I held up my hand again. For your own benefit, you'd better not try to leave. There are men posted with orders to shoot if anyone tries to run for it. If you're wise, you'll find someone who is standing nearby you during the game and have an alibi ready. Only don't try to dummy one, because it won't work. Stay here on the porch where you can be reached at a moment's notice. Charlotte came in the door, her face white, and asked, "Who was it, Mike?" "Myrna. The kid has nothing to worry about anymore. She's dead, and I have the killer right under my nose someplace." "Can I do something, Mike?" "Yeah, get the Bellamy sisters and bring them to me." When she went for them, I called for the bartender. Shaking like a leaf, he came over to me. "Who came in here?" I don't see nobody, boss. I see one girl come in. I never see her come out, 'cause she dead upstairs." "Were you here all the time?" Yes, sir, all the time. I watch for the folks to come in here for a drink. Then I goes to the bar." "What about the back door?" "It's locked, boss. Only way in is through here. Don't nobody come in except the girl. She dead." "Quit saying that over and over," I stormed. "Just answer my questions. Did you leave here for a second?" "No, sir, boss. Not hardly a second." "What's not hardly?" The kid looked scared. He was afraid to commit himself one way or another. "Come on, speak up." "I got me a drink once, boss. Just beer, that's all. Don't tell Miss Bellamy." "Damn," I said. That minute was time enough to let a murderer in here. "How quickly did you come back?" "No, wait a minute. Go in there and get a beer. Let me see how long it took you." The bartender shuffled off while I timed him. 15 seconds later, he was back with a bottle in his hand. "Did you do it that fast before? Think now. Did you drink it here or in there?" "Here, boss," he said simply, pointing to an empty bottle on the floor. I yelled to him not to move, then ran for the back of the house. The place was built in 2 sections, this part an addition to the other. The only way in was through the French windows to the bar and the back door, or the one connecting door to the other section. The windows were bolted. So was the back door. The twin doors between the 2 sections of the building were firmly in place and locked. I looked for other possible entries, but there were none. If that were so, I could still have the killer trapped somewhere inside. Quickly, I raced up the stairs. The maid was recovering, and I helped her to her feet. She was pasty-faced and breathing hard, so I sat her down on the top step as Charlotte came in with the twins. The maid was in no condition to answer questions. I shouted down to Charlotte to call Pat Chambers as fast as she could and get him up here. He could call the local cops later. Mary and Esther came up and took the maid out of my hands and half-carried her downstairs to a chair. I went into the murder room and closed the door after me. I didn't worry about fingerprints. My killer never left any. Myrna had on her blue coat, though I couldn't see why. The night was far too warm for it. She lay in front of a full-length mirror, doubled up. I looked closely at the wound. Another 45. The killer's gun. I was bent down on my knees looking for the bullet when I noticed the stuff on the rug. A white powder. Around it, the nap of the carpet had been ruffled as though someone had tried to scoop it up. I took an envelope from my pocket and got some of the grains inside. I felt the body. It was still warm, but then, at this temperature, rigor mortis wouldn't set in until late. Myrna's hands were clenched together so tightly I had difficulty working my fingers under hers. She had clawed at her coat, trying to hold the wound, and fibers of wool were caught under her fingernails. She had died hard, but fast. Death was merciful. I felt under the coat, and there in the folds of the cloth was the bullet. A 45. I had my killer here. All I had to do was find him. Why he should kill Myrna was beyond me. She was as far out of the case as I was. The motive. The motive. What the hell kind of a motive was it that ate into so many people? The people the killer reached out and touched had nothing to give. They were all so different. Jack, yes. I could see where he'd got mixed up in murder. But Myrna, no. Look at Bobo. Nothing could make me believe he was part of the picture. Where was motive there? Dope, he'd been delivering it, but the connection. He never lived long enough to tell where he got the package or to whom it was going. I shut the door softly behind me out of respect for the dead. Esther Bellamy had the maid in a chair at the foot of the stairs, trying to comfort her. Mary was pouring herself a stiff whiskey, her hands trembling. This hit her hard, whereas Esther was well composed. Charlotte came in with a cold compress and held it against the maid's head. "Can she talk yet?" I asked Charlotte. "Yes, I think so. Just be easy with her." I knelt in front of the maid and patted her hand. "Feel better?" She nodded. "Good. I just want to ask you a few questions. Then you can lie down. Did you see anyone come or go?" "No, I was in the back of the house cleaning up." "Did you hear a shot?" Another negative. I called over to the black man. "What about you? Hear anything?" "No, sir. I don't hear nothing." If neither had heard the shot, then the silencer must still be on the 45. And if the killer had it around, we'd find it. That kind of a rig is too big to hide. I went back to the maid. "Why did you go upstairs?" To straighten out the clothes. The women had left them all over the bed. That's when I saw the body." She buried her face in her hands and sobbed quietly. "Now, one more thing. Did you touch anything?" "No, I fainted." "Put her to bed, Charlotte. See if you can find something to make her sleep. She's pretty upset." Between Charlotte and Esther, they half-dragged the maid to bed. Mary Bellamy was pouring one drink after another in her. She wouldn't be standing up much longer. I took the bartender aside. "I'm going upstairs. Don't let anyone in or out unless I say so, you hear? You do, and you'll wind up in jail yourself." I didn't have to say anything else. He stammered out a reply that I didn't get, then locked and bolted the front door. My killer had to be somewhere around. He had to leave through the front door, unless he went out an upstairs window. Everything else was locked up tightly. But except for the little bit of time the bartender was away from the door, someone was there. That time had been enough to let the killer in, but not enough to let him back out again. Not without being seen by the bartender, that is. If he had seen someone and had been told to keep his mouth shut, I would have known it. I could swear that he was telling the truth. Besides, my killer would have knocked him off as well, and as easily, rather than take the risk of exposure. From the top of the stairs, the hall crossed like a T. Doors opened off the one side, and each proved to be a guest room. I tried the windows. Locked. I went up and down both ends of the T, trying to find where the exit was. Each room I inspected and searched with my rod and my fist, waiting, hoping. The murder room was the last room I tried, and that's where the killer got out. The window slid up easily, and I looked down 15 feet to a flagstone walk below. If he had jumped, he wouldn't be walking now. The drop was enough to break a leg, especially on those stones. Around the building and directly under the window ran a narrow ledge. It projected out about 8 inches from the wall and was clean of dust or dirt on both sides of the window. I lit a match and looked for heel marks in the concrete of the ledge, but there were none. Not a mark. This was enough to drive me nuts. Even the 8 inches wasn't enough to walk across on barefaced brick. I tried it. I got out on the ledge and tried first to walk along with my face to the wall, then with my back to it. In both cases, I almost took a spill. It would take a real athlete to cross that. Someone who was part cat. Inside the room, I pulled the window down and went back to the hall. At either end, a window overlooked the grounds. I didn't see it at first, but when I stuck my head out, there was a fire escape ladder built into the wall adjacent to the window. Oh, how pretty if it could be done. The killer strikes, then out the window to the ledge and around to the fire escape. Now I had an acrobat on my hands. Swell. More headaches. I went downstairs and took the bottle away from Mary in time to salvage a drink from the wreckage and ease her into a chair. She was dead drunk. A half hour later, I had still gotten nowhere when I heard the pounding of feet outside and told the bartender to open up. Pat and his staff walked in, escorted by some county police. How that guy could get around the red tape of city limitations and restrictions was beyond me. He went upstairs at once, listening as I gave him the details. I finished as he was bent over the body. The county coroner bustled in, declared the girl officially dead, and made out a report. "How long since she died?" Pat asked. The coroner hemmed and hawed, then said, "Roughly about 2 hours. This warm weather makes it difficult to place the time exactly. Tell better after an autopsy." 2 hours was close enough. It had happened while I was out in the bushes with Mary Bellamy. Pat asked me, "Everyone here?" "Guess so. Better get a guest list from Esther and check up." I posted guards around the wall and at the gate. "Okay, come on downstairs." Pat herded the entire group of them into the main room in the other section of the building. He had them packed in like sardines. Esther gave him a guest list and he read off names. As each one heard his name called, he sat on the floor. The detectives watched closely to be sure none of them moved until they were supposed to. Half the group was seated when Pat called out, "Harmon Wilder." No answer. He tried again. "Harmon Wilder." Still no answer. My little friend had vanished. Pat nodded to a detective who moved to a phone. The manhunt was on. 6 names later, Pat sang out, "Charles Sherman." He called it 3 more times and no one answered. That was a name I hadn't heard before. I walked over to Esther. "Who is this Sherman?" "Mr. Wilder's assistant. He was here during the game. I saw him." "Well, he's not here now." I relayed the information to Pat, and another name went out to call cars and police stations. Pat read down the list. When he was done, there were still 20 standees. Gate crashers. You find them everywhere. The total number crammed into that house was over 250 persons. Pat assigned a certain number to each detective and some to me. Because I had been on the scene, he let me take all the servants, the twins, Charlotte, and 10 others from the party. Pat took the gate crashers for himself. As soon as he gave out the list, he quieted the assembly and cleared his throat. "Everyone present here is under suspicion for murder," he said. "Naturally, I know that you all couldn't have done it. You are to report to each of my men as your name is called. They will speak to you separately. What we want is your alibi, whom you were with at the game or wherever you were," he checked his watch, 2 hours and 50 minutes ago. "If you can vouch for someone standing near you, do it. By doing so, you are only ensuring your own alibi. I want the truth, nothing else. We will catch you if you try falsifying your statements. That is all." I collected my group and took them out on the porch. The household help I disposed of first. They had all been together and spoke for one another. The 10 new faces assured me that they had been with certain parties, and I took their statements. Mary had been with me, so she was out. Esther had been beside the referee's stand most of the time, and this was corroborated by the rest. I shooed them away, Esther leading her still half-out sister. I saved Charlotte until last so we could have the porch together. "Now you, kitten," I said. "Where were you?" "You have a nerve," she said laughingly. "Right where you left me." Don't get sore, baby. I was trapped." I kissed her, and she said, "After that, all is forgiven. Now I'll tell you where I was. Part of the time, I was sipping a Coke with a nice young gentleman named Fields, and part of the time, exchanging witticisms with a rather elderly wolf. I don't know his name, but he was one of those that weren't on the list. He has a spade beard." I remembered him. I put down spade beard, no name. Charlotte stayed close to me as we walked back into the room. Pat was picking up the list as his men finished and cross-checking them to see if the stories held water. A couple had the names confused, but they were soon adjusted. When all were in, we compared them. Not a single one was without an alibi, and it didn't seem sensible that Wilder and Sherman should have run off. They had been accounted for too. Pat and I let out a steady stream of curses without stopping. When we got our breaths, Pat instructed his men to get names and addresses of everyone present and told them to inform the guests that they had better stay within reaching distance, or else. He was right. It was practically an impossibility to hold that many people there at once. It looked like we were still following a hopeless trail. Most of the cars left at once. Pat had a cop handing out the coats since he didn't want anyone messing up the murder room. I went up with Charlotte to get hers. The cop pulled out her blue job with the white wolf collar, and I helped her into it. Mary was still out, so I didn't say goodbye to her. Esther was at the door downstairs, as calm as ever, seeing the guests out, even being nice to the ones that didn't belong there. I shook hands with her and told her I'd see her soon, and Charlotte and I left. Instead of driving up, she had taken the train, so we both got into my car and started back. Neither one of us spoke much. As the miles passed under my wheels, I got madder and madder. The circle. It started with Jack and had ended with him. The killer finally got around to Myrna. It was crazy. The whole pattern was bugs. Now my motive was completely shot to hell. Myrna fitted in nowhere. I heard a sob beside me and caught Charlotte wiping tears from her eyes. That was easy to see. She had taken a liking to Myrna. I put my arm around her and squeezed. This must seem like a nightmare to her. I was used to death sitting on my doorstep. She wasn't. Maybe when the dragnet brought in Wilder and Sherman, there would be an answer to something. People just don't run away for nothing. The outsider, the answer to the question. Could either of them have been the outsider that belonged in the plot? Very possible. It seemed more possible now than ever. Manhunt. The things the cops were best at. Go get them. Don't miss. If they try to run, kill the bastards. I don't care if I don't get them myself, so long as someone does. No glory, justice. When I stopped in front of Charlotte's place, I had to stop thinking. I looked at my watch. Well after midnight. I opened the door for her. Want to come up? Not tonight, darling, I said. I want to go home and think. I understand. Kiss me goodnight. She held out her face and I kissed her. How I loved that girl. I'd be glad when this was over with and we could get married. Will I see you tomorrow? I shook my head. I doubt it. If I can find time, I'll call you. Please, Mike, she begged. Try to make it. Otherwise, I can't see you till Tuesday. What's the matter with Monday? I asked her. Esther and Mary are coming back to the city, and I promised to have supper with them. Esther is more upset than you realize. Mary will get over it fast enough, but her sister isn't like that. You know how women are when they get in a spot. Okay, baby. If I don't see you tomorrow, I'll give you a call Monday and see you Tuesday. Maybe then we can go get that ring. This time, I gave her a long kiss and watched her disappear into the building. I had some tall thinking to do. Too many had died. I was afraid to let it go further. It had to be now or not at all. I tooled the jalopy back to the garage, parked it, and went upstairs to bed.
And that was Chapter 12 of I, the Jury from Mickey-Spillane. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.